They chained her to the Alpha King's beast as punishment for a crime she didn't commit. By sunset, everyone in Blackfang Fortress expected to hear her final scream. The enormous white wolf had killed trained soldiers before. For 7 years, he had lived behind iron bars, drugged, beaten, and feared by an entire kingdom. No one could touch him without losing blood. No one could stand near him without hearing his growl. Yet when Mara was pushed into his enclosure and the heavy chain was locked around her wrist, something happened that no one in the fortress could explain. The beast walked toward her, slowly, silently, his silver eyes fixed on the terrified woman standing alone in the rain. Mara closed her eyes, waiting for his teeth. Instead, she felt something warm against her back. The wolf had curled his massive body around her. He was shielding her from the cold. Then he lowered his head beside her shoulder and fell asleep. The soldiers outside the cage stood frozen, because this was not supposed to happen. The Alpha King himself watched from the shadows above, unable to understand why his most dangerous creature had suddenly become gentle. But Mara noticed something no one else did. Beneath the beast's collar were scars. And hidden among those scars was a symbol connected to the Alpha King's brother, who had supposedly died 7 years ago, the brother whose body had never been found, a brother whose death had always been blamed on the beast. And if Mara was right, the creature they had spent 7 years calling a monster might have been the only witness to the kingdom's darkest secret. They chained Mara to the Alpha King's beast at sunset, expecting to hear her scream before the night was over. The iron gate slammed shut behind her with a sound that seemed to shake the entire courtyard. For a moment, Mara could hear nothing except the rain that fell steadily through the cold evening, striking the black stones beneath her boots and running in thin silver streams toward the drains along the fortress wall. Her brown dress was already soaked through. Wet strands of dark hair clung to her cheeks. One of her wrists burned where the soldiers had fastened the iron cuff, and the other end of the chain disappeared into the shadows behind her. She knew what was waiting there. Everyone did. Veyr, the Alpha King's beast, the white wolf who had become a nightmare spoken about in whispers across Arinder, the creature that had killed 3 trained guards, the creature that had broken an iron gate thick enough to stop a charging horse, the creature that, according to the stories, had once dragged a full-grown warhorse across the snow as though it weighed nothing. For 7 years, nobody had been permitted to come close to him, and now Mara had been chained directly to his collar. The soldiers backed away. Some of them would not even look at her. Mara slowly turned her head toward the fortress. Blackfang rose above her like a mountain of dark stone. Narrow windows glowed high above the courtyard, their warm light almost cruel against the gray rain. Somewhere behind one of those windows stood the Alpha King, Caelan. She had never seen him before tonight. She had heard stories about him, just as she had heard stories about Veyr. A cold king. A dangerous king. A man who had inherited a kingdom surrounded by enemies and ruled it with an iron hand. But right now, Mara had no room in her mind for kings, only the beast. Something moved inside the enclosure. Mara stopped breathing. A huge white shape slowly rose from a bed of straw. Veyr stepped into the faint lantern light. He was larger than any wolf Mara had ever seen. His shoulders rose nearly to her chest. His thick white fur darkened by old scars, and his silver-gray eyes reflected the flames burning beyond the bars. A heavy black collar circled his neck, the same collar attached to her chain. The beast stared at her. Mara felt every muscle in her body tighten. Behind the gate, someone whispered a prayer. Another soldier muttered that the woman would not last a minute. Mara swallowed. She wanted to run. Every instinct inside her screamed for it, but there was nowhere to go. The chain pulled tight. Veyr took one step forward. His paws made almost no sound against the straw. Another step. Mara backed away until the chain stopped her. The beast's head lowered. His lips did not curl. His teeth did not appear. He simply watched her. Mara's fingers trembled. Then she remembered something. Earlier, while being dragged through the fortress, she had seen one of the handlers pour a dark powder into the beast's food. She had smelled it immediately. Bitter root, a plant used by healers in tiny amounts to dull pain, but dangerous when repeatedly given to an animal. She had seen the way Veyr's body had reacted. The shaking, the restless pacing, the sudden snapping at the bars. Maybe the beast was not mad. Maybe someone had made him that way. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it made something inside her ache. She looked at the enormous animal. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The guard stared. Veyr moved closer. Mara closed her eyes, not because she believed she would survive, because she could not bear to watch the animal that had been taught to hate humans become a monster for the sake of men. She waited 0.1 second, 0.2, 0.3, but nothing happened. Then she felt warm breath against her hand. Mara opened her eyes. Veyr was standing directly in front of her. His nose hovered over her trembling fingers. He smelled rain, iron, fear, and something else, the old scar across her palm. The scar she had carried since childhood. The scar she had received while pulling a trapped white wolf pup from beneath a burning cart. Veyr touched his nose to it. Mara froze. The enormous beast shuddered. His eyes changed for one strange moment. Mara felt as though he recognized something she did not remember. Then his head lowered. She slowly raised her hand. Her fingers disappeared into the thick fur beneath his jaw. Veyr did not move away. Instead, he turned his massive body. Passed around her. The chain rattled softly. Then he lowered himself behind her. Mara felt his warmth against her back. She looked over her shoulder. The beast had curled himself around her. His enormous body formed a living wall between her and the rain. Then, with his nose resting near her shoulder, Veyr closed his eyes and fell asleep. The courtyard became completely silent. An soldier moved. An servant breathed loudly enough to be heard. Even the rain seemed softer. High above them, behind the dark window of the royal tower, Caelan slowly stood. His eyes remained fixed on the white beast. For 7 years, Veyr had refused every human hand. "7 years of chains, 7 years of blood, 7 years of rage." And now, when given a frightened stranger, he had not attacked. He had protected her. Caelan's face tightened, because he suddenly understood something far more dangerous than a beast showing mercy. Veyr had not chosen to spare Mar. He had chosen her, and somewhere inside Blackfang Fortress, someone had just become terrified of what that meant. The next morning came pale and cold. Mara woke before sunrise. For several seconds she did not remember where she was. Then she felt the heavy warmth behind her. Veyr. His breathing was slow, steady. His white fur rose and fell against her back. Mara carefully tried to move. The chain tightened. Veyr opened one silver eye. Mara froze. The beast lifted his enormous paw. Instead of attacking her, he placed it over the chain, as though guarding it. Mara stared. Then she noticed something she had missed the night before: the collar. Beneath the wet fur was a small section of black metal scratched with a symbol. She leaned closer. Her heart stopped. It was not the royal crest of Irine. It was a wolf surrounded by 3 narrow lines. A symbol she had seen once before on an old wooden box that had belonged to her mother. And beneath the symbol were 2 letters: Adrian, the name of the Alpha King's missing brother. Mara's mouth went dry. She looked toward the fortress. If Veyr had been present when Adrian disappeared, then the official story was a lie. And if the symbol had been carved into Veyr's collar afterward, someone had wanted to make sure the beast carried the memory of that night forever. Mara slowly touched the mark. Far above her, Caelan was already giving an order: "Seal the gates." Because he feared that someone else inside Blackfang had noticed what Mara had just discovered. By sunrise, the story had already traveled through every corridor of Blackfang Fortress. The beast had chosen a woman. The beast had slept beside her. The beast had allowed her to touch him. By breakfast, servants were whispering about it behind kitchen doors. By mid-morning, soldiers were avoiding the courtyard. And before noon, 3 noblewomen had already decided that Mara must be some kind of witch. Mara herself felt nothing like a witch. Her wrist was swollen. Her back ached from sleeping on wet stone. Her clothes smelled of rain and straw, and she was standing beside Veyr with a small bowl of warm water in her hands, trying to reach the wound beneath his collar. The beast watched her. Mara dipped a cloth into the water. Slowly, she touched it to the fur beneath his neck. Veyr remained still. The wound was worse than she had imagined. Old scars crossed the skin beneath the collar, but there were fresh cuts too. Someone had tightened the metal recently. Repeatedly. Mara's jaw tightened. Who did this to you? Veyr only breathed. She carefully cleaned the wound. A soldier watched from beyond the gate. His face was pale. You should not touch him, he warned. Mara did not look up. If I don't, the wound will become infected. He doesn't need healing. He does. The soldier looked toward Veyr. The great wolf opened one eye. The soldier immediately looked away. Mara almost smiled. Then she saw the food bowl. A thick piece of meat lay inside it. Something dark clung to the surface. Mara leaned closer. The bitter smell returned. Her expression hardened. She scraped a little of the powder onto the edge of her cloth. It burned her fingertips, not physically. She knew the plant. Blackroot. And tiny amounts it could calm pain. Repeated doses could cause confusion, nightmares, aggression, and severe sensitivity to sound. Someone had been poisoning Veyr, not to kill him, to keep him dangerous. Mara looked toward the guards. Who prepares his food? No one answered. That silence told her more than words could have. Later that morning, Alpha King Caelan entered the enclosure. Every soldier stiffened. Mara looked up. He was younger than she had expected. Not young, exactly, but perhaps in his early 30s, tall, broad-shouldered. Dark hair fell slightly across his forehead. He wore no crown, only a black coat fastened at the throat, with a silver wolf crest over his heart. His face was controlled, but there was exhaustion around his eyes. He stopped. Several steps away, Veyr lifted his head. Mara expected the beast to growl. He did not. Caelan looked at him, then at Mara. You are the healer from Briar Hollow. Mara nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. You were accused of entering restricted royal land. I entered the forest because an animal was injured. You were ordered not to. I never received that order. Caelan studied her. Mara could feel the weight of his gaze. She had imagined a cruel king. Instead, she saw a man who seemed to be searching for something he had lost years ago. What did you find in the forest? He asked. An injured white wolf. Caelan's expression changed slightly. Where is it? It escaped before the soldiers arrived. And you followed it? No. She hesitated. I carried it. Caelan looked at her scarred hand. Then his eyes moved toward Veyr. Something passed silently between king and beast. You noticed the powder, Caelan said. Mara's breath caught. He had known. I did. How? I'm a healer. Caelan stepped closer to the bowl. He examined the dark residue. His jaw tightened. How long? Mara shook her head. I don't know. I asked how long you think someone has been giving it to him. Long enough to change him. Caelan's eyes hardened. Change him into what? A creature everyone is afraid of. Silence. For the first time, something like shame crossed the king's face. He looked at Veyr. The wolf stared back. Then Caelan said quietly, The records say he was always violent. The records are wrong. You seem very certain for someone who has known him for less than a day. Mara placed the cloth beside the bowl. I know frightened animals. And you believe he is frightened? Mara looked at the scars beneath Veyr's collar. I believe someone taught him that pain comes from human hands. Caelan said nothing. The words struck deeper than Mara intended. He left without another question. But from that day forward, things began to change. The powder disappeared from Veyr's food. His meals became cleaner. His water was changed twice a day. Mara's chains were removed from the beast's collar, though she was still not permitted to leave the fortress. Every morning, she cleaned his wounds. Every evening, she sat near him. Sometimes she hummed. It was a simple village melody her mother had sung when Mara was a child. Veyr listened. The first evening, he only lifted his head. The second, he moved closer. The third, he lowered his enormous head onto the stone beside Mara's knee. She kept humming, his eyes closed. Beyond the bars, a young kitchen servant named Ellen began leaving scraps of roasted meat near the enclosure. A stable boy started watching Veyr from behind a post. Even soldiers slowly stopped reaching for their weapons whenever the beast moved. Fear did not disappear, but it began to loosen. And while Mara was changing Veyr's life, Caelan was digging through old records. He discovered something disturbing. The official account of Prince Adrian's disappearance stated that Veyr had attacked him during a storm 7 years earlier. But the dates were wrong. The king's father had signed an order concerning Adrian 2 days after the supposed attack. There were also missing pages, witness statements that had vanished, guard reports. Rewritten, a stable record showing Veyr had been locked in his enclosure hours before Adrian disappeared. Caelan read the documents alone deep into the night. His brother had not disappeared because of the beast. Someone had used the beast to hide what happened, and someone had spent 7 years making sure Caelan never asked the right questions. Then came the storm. Thunder rolled over Blackfang. Veyr became restless. His ears flattened. His body trembled. Mara noticed immediately. She approached him. Slowly. "It's all right." Lightning flashed. The beast struck the bars. Metal screamed. Soldiers rushed forward. Mara stepped between them and Veyr. "Don't." The beast slammed his shoulder against the enclosure. A section of iron bent. A soldier raised his spear. Mara turned sharply. "Lower it. He'll kill you."
"No."
The soldier stared. Veyr pushed through the damaged gate. Everyone froze. The enormous wolf moved toward Mara and he turned. He placed his body between her and the armed soldiers, not attacking, protecting. Caelan arrived seconds later. He saw everything. His expression changed. "Lower your weapons." No one moved. That was an order. The spears lowered. Veyr remained beside Mara. The storm continued. Later, after the courtyard emptied, Mara noticed another mark scratched beneath Veyr's collar. This one looked like a map. A river, a ridge, a narrow path through trees. She knew that path. It led toward the northern forest, the same forest where her mother had disappeared. Mara's fingers went cold. She had spent years believing her mother had died there. Now she wondered whether her mother had discovered something before she disappeared, and whether Veyr had been there. Before Mara could investigate, Lord Garrick arrived. He wore dark red beneath his armor and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. He was the chief warden of Blackfang. He smiled when he saw Mara. The smile never reached his eyes. "The king has ordered your transfer." Mara looked toward the guards. Caelan had said nothing about moving her. "Where?" "The lower cells." Veyr growled. Garrick's smile disappeared. "Take her." The soldiers grabbed Mara. Veyr lunged. Mara screamed his name. The beast stopped only for a heartbeat, long enough for her to see his eyes. Then the soldiers dragged her away. Her voice echoed through the stone corridors. Above them, Veyr howled. The sound shook the fortress. That night, Caelan discovered the order had never been issued. He ran toward the underground cells. 2 guards lay unconscious outside. Blood marked the floor. The cell was empty. A trail led deeper into the darkness. Caelan followed it until he reached an ancient stone door. Behind it came a faint sound, Mara, and beneath her voice came a low, furious growl. "Veyr." Caelan placed his hand on the door. Then he heard metal scrape from the other side. Something was moving in the darkness. The door beneath Blackfang had not been opened in generations. Caelan knew that because the old royal records described the passage as sealed after the fortress was built over the ruins of an older kingdom, yet blood was running beneath it now. Mara's blood. Caelan drew his sword. He looked at the 2 unconscious guards. Neither had been killed. That mattered. Whoever had taken Mara wanted her alive. He pushed against the door. It did not move. Then Veyr growled again. Caelan stepped back. "Veyr." The growl stopped. For one strange moment, there was silence. Then something struck the door from inside. Stone cracked. Caelan stepped away. The ancient door split. Veyr emerged through the opening covered in dust. His white fur was streaked with blood, but it was not his. Behind him, Mara stumbled into the passage. Her wrists were bruised. A cut ran along her cheek. Caelan caught her before she fell. She pulled away almost immediately. "Where is he?" Caelan looked at her. "You mean Garrick?" Mara shook her head.
"No."
"The guard." She pointed into the darkness. There was an injured guard. They left him there. Even now, even after being dragged into the tunnels, she was worried about someone else. Caelan went back inside. The guard was alive. Barely. Mara knelt beside him. She tore a strip from her sleeve and pressed it against his wound. The man stared at her in disbelief. "You shouldn't help me." Mara kept pressure on the wound. "You are bleeding." "I helped take you." "I know. Then why?" Mara looked at him. "Because you're hurt." The guard closed his eyes. Something changed in his face. Caelan watched silently. He had seen soldiers obey commands. He had seen nobles bargain. He had seen men risk their lives for gold, titles, and revenge. He had rarely seen anyone help another person simply because they were hurting. They moved deeper into the tunnels once the guard could walk. The walls were covered in faded carvings, white wolves, mountains, kings. Women holding out their hands. Mara stopped before one mural. A white wolf stood. Beside a woman, behind them, a crowned king knelt, not commanded, kneeling. Mara touched the stone. These wolves weren't servants. Caelan studied the carving. What were they? Guardians. They continued. Another mural showed a man placing an iron collar around a white wolf. The animal's eyes were painted in red. Behind the man stood a crowned figure. Mara felt sick. The first chains had been placed on the wolves generations ago, and perhaps everything that followed had grown from that one act. They reached a circular chamber. At its center stood an ancient stone marked with the same symbol on Veyr's collar. The wolf approached it. The symbol began to glow. Mara stepped back. Veyr touched his nose to the stone. Hidden writing appeared. Caelan moved closer. The words were old, but still readable. The White Guardians had been bound to the royal bloodline through trust, not ownership, not chains, trust, and one line beneath the covenant was different. Mara read it aloud. The Guardian will recognize the hand that carries no cruelty. Caelan looked at her. Veyr looked at her. Mara's scarred palms suddenly felt hot. She understood. The wolf had not chosen her because she was powerful. He had chosen her because she had never tried to own him. Then another line appeared. Should the covenant be broken, the Guardian shall protect the hidden blood. Caelan went still. Hidden blood? Mara stared at the wall. A name appeared. Adrian. Caelan's face drained of color. His brother had survived, at least long enough to be named here. Adrian was alive, he whispered. Mara turned toward him. Before she could answer, footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Garrick. He appeared with armed men. His face was calm, too calm. You were never meant to see this. Caelan raised his sword. How long? Garrick smiled. Long enough. The injured guard stepped forward. You murdered the prince. Garrick's eyes moved toward him. And you were foolish enough to survive. Everything became clear. Garrick had poisoned Veyr. He had manipulated the records. He had helped hide Adrian. He had controlled the court from behind the king's throne, and now he intended to kill Caelan during the coming winter moon gathering and replace him with a ruler he could control. The old chamber began to shake. Garrick had triggered something beneath the stone. Dust fell from the ceiling. Caelan grabbed Mara. Run. They moved toward the passage. A section of stone collapsed. Veyr was trapped on the other side. Mara stopped. Caelan seized her arm. We have to go. She pulled free. No. Mara. He saved me. The ceiling cracked again. Stone crashed down. Mara dropped to her knees and began pulling rubble away with her hands. Her fingers split. Blood stained the gray stone. Caelan stared. Stop. She kept digging. Mara, you will be buried. She shook her head. He would not leave me. Caelan looked at the rubble, then at her bleeding hands. Something inside him broke open. He knelt beside her. Together they dug. The injured guard joined them, stone after stone. Dust filled the air. Then they heard breathing. Veyr alive. Caelan pulled the last slab aside. The beast crawled through. He was limping. Blood ran from his shoulder, but in his jaws was something dark, a signet. Caelan recognized it immediately. His brother's. The old royal crest was stained brown with dried blood. Caelan closed his fingers around it. His hand shook. 7 years of grief had suddenly become 7 years of lies. Garrick had escaped. The chamber was collapsing, and somewhere beyond those walls, someone who knew the truth was still alive. The winter moon gathering was only days away. The days that followed were filled with quiet preparation. Blackfang Fortress looked peaceful from the outside. Snow covered the towers. Smoke rose from chimneys. Merchants arrived through the western gate with carts of grain, wool, wine, and winter spices. But beneath that ordinary movement, the kingdom was changing. Caelan trusted almost no one. The royal guards were divided. The nobles were divided. Even the servants whispered carefully. Garrick had disappeared. That meant he was dangerous. Mara was no longer chained. That small freedom felt strange. For the first time since arriving at Blackfang, she could walk through the courtyard without hearing iron scrape against stone. Veyr followed her. At first, soldiers objected, then Caelan gave one order. Let him walk. So Veyr walked, through the gardens, past the kitchens, along the old stone walls. Children stared from doorways, servants watched from windows. The great white wolf who had once been hidden behind iron bars became part of daily life. Mara noticed something unexpected. People began changing because of him. A kitchen maid left a bowl of water outside. A stable boy brought him a piece of roasted meat. An old guard who had once feared him sat on a bench nearby. Veyr never demanded affection. He simply accepted what was offered. Mara continued cleaning his wounds. The poison was leaving his body slowly. His eyes became clearer, his breathing steadier. One evening, Caelan found Mara sitting beside Veyr in the garden. Snow had begun falling. The wolf's head rested against her leg. Caelan stood several steps away. "My brother likes snow," he said. Mara looked up. He used to leave the castle, without guards. Caelan's mouth tightened. He believed the mountains were quieter than the palace. Mara lowered her eyes. "You loved him." Caelan looked toward the snow. "I was supposed to protect him. You were his brother. I was also the heir." He paused. "I chose duty." Mara said nothing. Caelan looked at her. "I believed the beast killed him. You believed what they told you. That is not much better." There was no anger in her expression, only understanding. "You were grieving." Caelan looked away. For the first time, Mara saw the man beneath the crown, not the Alpha King, not the ruler, a brother who had spent 7 years blaming an animal for a death that may never have happened. Their trust grew slowly after that. Caelan opened the royal records to Mara. She found her mother's name, her breath caught. Alara Vale. Caelan nodded. "Your mother worked in the royal infirmary." Mara stared at the page. She had known her mother as a healer. She had never known she had served inside Blackfang. The records revealed that Alara had treated Adrian after an assassination attempt. She had discovered traces of poison. She had discovered that Garrick's men were involved. Then she had disappeared. Mara's eyes filled. All those years, she had believed her mother had abandoned her, but the truth was different. Her mother had run because she was trying to protect her daughter. She had carried evidence away from the fortress. She had raised Mara far from the court, and she had died before she could tell her the truth. Mara closed the journal. Her hands trembled. Caelan did not touch her. He simply remained beside her. That restraint mattered. He understood that grief did not always need words. Then came the winter moon gathering. The fortress filled with light. Hundreds of candles burned in the great hall. Nobles arrived wearing velvet cloaks. Foreign merchants brought gifts. Musicians played near the western balcony. Outside, snow covered the mountains. Inside, danger waited. Mara noticed the servant because he moved too carefully. A small silver bowl was hidden beneath his cloak. She followed him. Down one corridor, then another. The music faded. He entered a narrow room. Mara looked through the doorway. Weapons, royal seals, letters, maps, and Blackroot powder. Her stomach tightened. Then a voice came behind her. You have become very troublesome. Garrick. Mara turned. He stood at the end of the corridor. You should have remained in the cage. Mara backed away. Where is Adrian? Garrick smiled. Alive. Her breath stopped. He lives because I allow him to. Why? Because a dead prince is a martyr. A living prince is a weapon. Mara felt sick. You poisoned Veyr. I made him useful. You destroyed his mind. I gave the kingdom a monster to fear. Garrick stepped closer. And fear is easier to rule than loyalty. Mara's hand slipped toward the door. Garrick noticed. You will not leave. Then Veyr appeared. The sound of his paws against the stone was almost silent. Garrick turned. The wolf stood at the far end of the corridor, his white fur bright against the darkness, his eyes fixed on Garrick. Garrick stepped back. For the first time, Mara saw fear on his face. Veyr charged. The door behind Mara shattered. The wolf reached her. He did not attack Garrick. He stood between them. Guards rushed in. Nobles began shouting. Garrick ran, but the hidden chamber had been exposed. Caelan arrived with his sword drawn. He saw the weapons, the royal seals, the Blackroot, the evidence, and then the fortress bells began ringing once, twice, 3 times. The gates slammed shut. Assassins flooded the great hall. Chaos erupted. Caelan moved toward the throne. Mara looked at the attackers. They were not surrounding him. They were surrounding Veyr. Crossbows rose. She understood. They were not trying to kill the king. They were trying to kill the proof. The old guardian. Mara moved before she thought. She stepped in front of Veyr. The first bolt flew. Pain exploded through her shoulder. She felt Veyr's roar shook the hall. Caelan abandoned the throne. He ran toward her, and for the first time in his life, the Alpha King chose one life before the crown. Mara remembered the floor first. Cold stone against her cheek. The smell of smoke, blood, snow blowing through broken windows, Veyr's growl above her. Then Caelan's arms. He lifted her. Stay awake. His voice sounded different, not like a king, like a frightened man. Mara tried to breathe. I'm awake. Good. The bolt had passed through the upper part of her shoulder. Pain spread down her arm, but she was alive. Caelan carried her toward the infirmary. Veyr followed. No soldier dared stop him. Behind them, Blackfang was still under attack. Garrick had taken control of the throne room. His voice echoed through the hall. The king has abandoned his kingdom. Some nobles believed him. Fear moved through the room. Garrick stood beneath the royal banners. He pointed toward the doorway. Look at him. He would sacrifice Arinder for a prisoner and a beast. Caelan did not answer. He carried Mara into the infirmary. The healer on duty removed the bolt. Mara bit down on a piece of cloth, her eyes filled with tears. Veyr pressed against the wall. He watched every movement. When the bolt finally came free, Mara collapsed against the pillows. Caelan stood beside her. You should stay here. She shook her head. No, Mara. They have villagers. Caelan froze. Garrick took people from Briar Hollow. He will use them against you. Then we have to stop him. You've lost blood. So have they. Caelan stared at her. She was pale. Her shoulder was wrapped. Her hands still carried cuts from the underground chamber. Yet she was thinking about people she had not seen in weeks. Caelan closed his eyes briefly. Then he said, You are not going alone. They returned to the great hall. Veyr walked beside them. The room went silent. Mara saw the faces of the nobles. Some were afraid, some ashamed, some uncertain. Garrick stood at the center. He had a sword at his side. Behind him stood armed men. Then the injured guard stepped forward. His name was Tomas. He had once served Garrick. Now he carried the truth. He told them everything. The poisoning, the secret meetings, the false records, Adrian, the assassination plan. Garrick shouted that the man was lying then. Caelan placed Adrian's signet on the throne. The room fell silent. One of the oldest nobles approached. He was Lord Adrian, nearly 80 years old. He stared at the signet, then at Veyr's collar. His face changed. My family kept the old records, he said. Garrick went pale. Adrian knelt. The covenant was real. Murmurs spread through the hall. The White Wolves protected the royal bloodline before the first chains were forged. Another noble stepped forward, then another. Families who had hidden their knowledge for generations began revealing what they knew. Garrick's power collapsed in minutes, but he was not finished. He seized a sword, his eyes fixed on Mara. All of this is because of her. He moved. Veyr stepped forward. Garrick raised the blade. The wolf did not attack. He simply stood between them. Garrick hesitated. Everyone saw it. The great beast was not the danger. The man holding the sword was... Caelan approached. "Drop the sword." Garrick laughed. "You think this kingdom belongs to you?" Caelan's voice was quiet.
"No."
He looked at Mara, then Veyr. "It belongs to the people who live here." Garrick attacked. Caelan disarmed him. The sword struck the floor. Guards seized Garrick. He fought until the last moment, but there was nowhere left for him to hide. His crimes were witnessed. His records had been found. His allies were exposed, and the people he had tried to control no longer feared him. Caelan stripped him of his title. Garrick was imprisoned for treason, murder, kidnapping, poisoning, and conspiracy. But Caelan did not stop there. He ordered every beast enclosure in the fortress opened. The chains were removed. The old torture equipment was destroyed. The rooms where Veyr had been drugged were burned clean. The royal hunting laws were rewritten. Animals could no longer be captured for entertainment. Villagers could not be punished without evidence. Healers were granted protection under royal law, and the northern forests were declared sanctuary. For the first time in generations, the kingdom began repairing something deeper than a political wound. It began repairing its relationship with nature. Then came the message. A rider arrived 3 days later. He carried the seal of a distant monastery. Caelan opened the letter. His hands began shaking. Adrian was alive. He had lived for 7 years under another name. He had been injured during the assassination attempt and hidden by monks who feared Garrick's men. He had survived. Caelan left the room without speaking. Mara followed him. She found him alone in the chapel. He was sitting beneath the old stone arch. The letter was still in his hand. Mara sat beside him. Neither spoke. After a while, Caelan said, "I thought I buried him." Mara looked at him. "You don't have to anymore." He nodded. A tear slipped down his face. He did not hide it. Mara looked away. She gave him that privacy. When Adrian returned to Arinder weeks later, the reunion was not perfect. There was too much lost time. Too many unanswered questions, too much pain, but they embraced, and that was enough for the first day. Mara began thinking about leaving. Her work was finished. Garrick was defeated. Veyr was free. The kingdom no longer needed her. One morning, she packed her small bag. Caelan found her near the western
gate.
"You are leaving?" Mara nodded. "I came here as a prisoner." "I know. I don't want to leave as one." Caelan looked at her. "You never were." She smiled sadly. "You are the king. And you are free." He reached into his coat. He did not give her gold. He did not offer a title. He handed her a small key. "There is a house near the eastern garden." Mara stared at it. "It belongs to you. I can't accept royal property. It isn't a gift from the king." She looked at him. "It is an offer from a man who owes you more than he can repay." Mara closed her fingers around the key. "What would I do there?" "Whatever you want." She looked toward Veyr. The wolf stood beneath an apple tree. His white fur moved gently in the wind. Mara smiled. "I would build a healing house." Caelan nodded. "Then build one." She stayed. Not because she belonged to the king, not because she was bound to Veyr, because for the first time, staying was her choice. That evening, Mara opened her mother's old journal. A loose page fell from between the covers. She picked it up. There was a final message. The white wolves were never meant to serve the king. They were meant to protect the people. Beneath the words was a drawing, a newborn white wolf. Mara stared at it. Something in her chest tightened. Her mother had known. She had known. The covenant would return, and perhaps she had spent her entire life protecting the hope that it would. Outside the window, Veyr lifted his head. He was staring toward the mountains. A distant howl answered, then another. Mara stepped outside. The sound faded into the night. She looked toward the dark forest. Spring would come soon, and with it, perhaps, the return of the White Guardians. Spring arrived slowly in Arinder. Snow melted from the lower slopes first, then from the village roads. Streams appeared beneath the ice, carrying pieces of winter down toward the valley. The mountains remained white, but the forests began turning green again. Blackfang Fortress changed with the season. The old cages were gone. The iron gates had been removed. The stone courtyard where Veyr had once been chained had been cleaned, though faint scratches remained where the metal rings had once been fixed into the ground. Mara built her healing house beside the eastern gardens. It was small, warm. Wooden shelves filled its walls. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling. A stone fireplace kept the rooms warm. Villagers came from miles away. She treated broken bones, fevers, wounds, sick animals. She never asked whether someone was rich. She never asked what family they belonged to. She simply helped. Veyr remained nearby. Sometimes he disappeared into the forest for hours, sometimes days. But every evening, he returned. He would lie outside the healing house while Mara worked. People became used to seeing him there. Children no longer screamed when they saw him. Some would leave flowers near his paws. He never touched them. He simply watched. Months passed. Adrian remained in Arinder. His relationship with Caelan slowly healed. They walked together through the gardens. They argued sometimes. They remembered. They forgave slowly. The kingdom became stronger, not because its soldiers became more powerful, because its people trusted their ruler again. And Veyr became something else entirely, a symbol, not of fear, but of protection. Mara never forgot the night she had been chained to him. She returned to the courtyard often. One winter morning, nearly a year after the night everything changed. She stood there alone. Snow was falling. The courtyard looked almost exactly as it had before, white, quiet, cold. She found the place where the chain had been attached. Only 2 small iron scars remained in the stone. Mara knelt. She placed her hand over them. Her fingers remembered the cold, the fear, the sound of the gate closing, the weight of the chain. She remembered believing she would die. She remembered closing her eyes, then warmth, a huge white body curling around her, a heartbeat against her back. She smiled. Footsteps sounded behind her. Caelan. He stopped several feet away. He did not interrupt. Mara looked over her shoulder. Do you remember? Every night. She looked back at the stone. I thought I was going to die here. I know. I thought Veyr was going to kill me. Caelan looked toward the gardens. So did I. Mara laughed softly. Then Veyr appeared. He walked across the snow, slowly. His fur had grown thicker since the poisoning ended. His body was stronger. His eyes were clear. He approached Mara. She stood. Veyr lowered his head. The beast had chosen her because she had looked at him and seen pain before she saw danger. That was all. And perhaps that was enough. Caelan reached into his coat. He carried something small, a silver pendant. Mara opened her hand. He placed it in her palm. It had been made from the broken iron chain that once bound her to Veyr. The old metal had been melted down, reforged. The chain had become silver. Mara looked at it for a long time. You kept it. I thought you should decide what it means. She closed her fingers around the pendant. It means I am free. Caelan smiled. Then, that is what it means. Their relationship had changed slowly. There had been no sudden promise, and grand declaration. Just small things, shared mornings, quiet conversations, walking through the gardens, Caelan learning when to speak and when to remain silent. Mara learning that she did not have to carry every burden alone. Love came between them the way spring came to Arinder, quietly. almost unnoticed, until one day, it was everywhere. Years later, children in the kingdom would hear the story, but they would hear a different story from the one told before. They would not hear about a monster. They would hear about Veyr, the White Guardian. They would hear about the healer who had been chained to him as punishment. They would hear that everyone expected blood, but the beast had curled around her and slept. They would hear that the woman who entered the enclosure as a prisoner became one of the most respected healers in Arinder. They would hear that the king who inherited a fortress built on fear learned that strength without compassion could destroy everything it was meant to protect. And they would hear about the white wolves returning to the mountains, because they did return. The first sightings came in the northern valley. A shepherd saw 3 white shapes moving between the pines. Then hunters reported paw prints in untouched snow. Then an entire village woke one morning to find white wolves watching from the ridge above their homes. They did not attack. They did not come for food. They watched, then disappeared. Mara traveled north when she heard. Veyr went with her. Several younger wolves followed at a distance. One was smaller than the others, a young white wolf with bright eyes. Mara stopped when she saw it. She remembered her mother's drawing. The same shape, the same ears, the same narrow face. Her eyes filled with tears. She finally understood. Her mother had not been preparing Mara for a secret. She had been preparing her for hope. The forest was silent around them. Snow rested on the branches. Veyr moved closer. The young wolf stepped forward. For a moment, the 2 white wolves stood nose to nose. Then Veyr stepped back. He allowed the younger animal to approach Mara. Mara lowered herself into the snow. She did not reach. She waited. The young wolf came closer, closer, then touched its nose to her scarred palm. Mara closed her eyes. The same place, the same scar, the same gentle contact. Only now there were no chains, and guards, and iron gate, and one waiting for blood. The old covenant had returned, not through conquest, through trust. Mara stood. The wolves moved around her. Behind them, far in the distance, Blackfang Fortress stood beneath the mountains. It was still made of dark stone, still old, still scarred, but it no longer looked like a prison. Warm light shone from its windows. Smoke rose peacefully from its chimneys. People moved along its walls. And somewhere inside lived a king who had learned that a kingdom was not measured by how many people feared its ruler. It was measured by how many people felt safe beneath his rule. Mara looked toward the mountains. Veyr stood beside her. The younger wolves waited behind him. The wind moved through the trees. One wolf howled. Another answered. Then another. The sound rolled across the valley. It was not a warning. It was not a cry of hunger. It sounded almost like a promise. Mara rested her hand against Veyr's white fur. She remembered the night she had been chained to him. She remembered the cold, the fear, the rain, the soldiers waiting for her. Death. She remembered closing her eyes, and then the warmth that had surrounded her. For years, people had believed the miracle was that a beast had chosen a woman. But Mara finally understood that the greater miracle had been something else. That night, she had been given a choice. She could have answered cruelty with cruelty. She could have hated Veyr because everyone told her to. She could have hated Caelan because he was the king. She could have carried bitterness for the rest of her life. Instead, she chose kindness, not because kindness was easy, because someone had to choose it first, and that choice had changed a beast, then a king, then a kingdom. Veyr lowered his enormous head beside her hand. Mara smiled. The sun began rising over the mountains. Golden light spilled across the snow. The wolves turned toward the forest. Mara followed. Behind her, the fortress grew